Hello and welcome to this weekend's last seminar, the seminar series of Adapt, Evolve and Succeed. Today we have with us Shobit Garg. Shobit, who is an alumnus of ISBN and Kolkata 2008-10 batch, and he has made fantastic career growth. He started his career with ITC and then finally moved on from different sections. Right now, he is the key account manager of the e-commerce FMCG of ITC. Welcome, Shombit. It's great to have you with us. We also have Professor Brita Sri, communication trainer with over a decade of experience at ISBN and Kolkata. Brita, it's lovely to have you in the panel, like always. Shomit, let's talk about your journey. Like you started with ITC, with offline retail and then moving on to online fashion apparel. Finally, right now you're handling online FMCG. It's been quite a spectrum for you, I believe. So given that, would you talk a little about the basics of how you approach a business? You know, the big umbrella.
Okay. So basically, I think it's an important question because regardless of the size or type of business, I think it is very important to bring down the most complex business down to its fundamentals. I think that is very critical. So I'll try to kind of sum up my learning from my journey in retail. So with the help of few examples. So I think the example that I want to take up is that of a street vendor, right, who is retailing on the street, because I believe the fundamentals of business don't change irrespective of the scale. So when we pass through like people who are selling goods from tables and carts right on the street, it never kind of occurs to us to kind of talk to the street vendors about business, right? After all, what would they know? What they do is quite simple, and what could we possibly learn from them? But if you do take if you do take the pain to kind of or the initiative to speak to the street vendors about how they make a living, I think you would notice something very surprising, and that is that no matter where they live or what they sell or what culture they come from, I think they speak a universal language of business, right? Now each morning, let us try to figure out what a street vendor does every day. So each morning he has to figure out what to buy that morning. So what quantity, what quality, based on what he thinks can sell, right? So in our business management paradigm, we call this sales forecast, right? So the second decision that he has to figure out, which is very critical, is that what prices to charge. It's a very critical decision. And he has to be nimble enough to adjust prices as needed during the day. So the rules of the game are no different for big businesses, right? Now he has to take a call first, whether to cut prices. If yes, when to cut that price and by how much, right? Because the vendor doesn't want anything left over, because at the end of the day he wants cash to kind of survive in his business, right? Now, the point I'm trying to make is that the things are no different for large companies. So even for the company that I work with. So just to give you an example, say the Reserve Bank of India increases the interest rates suddenly. So the demand, say for an automobile industry might suddenly drop, right? And companies might not be able to adjust production quickly enough. So this might they might kind of end up with more inventory than they need. And it would take a kind of heroic effort on their part to dispose of that inventory. And then they have to adopt a strategy which is very similar to what the street vendor is doing. They have to kind of introduce rebates, or they have to increase ad spends, which will kind of hurt their profitability and of course cheapen their brand image, right? Now, again, let us come back to the street vendor example. So each morning the street vendor sets up his cart, right? He puts the best looking fruit in the front, which in our terms, in my retail management way of things, it is called merchandising, or it is called visual merchandising. That's what we used to do in a Will's Lifestyle store. We used to kind of project the best looking product on the showcase to kind of attract the attention of the customers, right? So the
Right,
point I'm
right.
trying to make is the fundamentals of business doesn't change, right? Now, let us look at what happens when he is having trouble selling the products, right? Now, there are 3, 4 things that he can strategies that he can adopt. The fruit vendor, he can either cut price, right? That's number one. So by doing so, he's increasing the value of the product for the customer. The second thing that he can do is he can rearrange the display, right? That's typically what we used to do in retail stores. So something, a low selling product with a low sell through, we used to very frequently rearrange the display of the product just to make sure that there's some movement, some increment in throughput that happens. The third thing that the street vendor might choose to do is yell louder. He might start screaming louder. That is nothing but to, in our terms, in business management paradigm, it is advertising, right? Nothing else. And the fourth, or the last but not the least, that he can do is that he can tell himself that tomorrow I'll find a better price to buy. So this is, I'm talking about a situation where he is facing trouble in terms of selling his merchandise, right? So he can either find a better price to buy, or he can change his assortment of fruits and vegetables. In business management paradigm, it is known as a product mix, right? When a particular product mix doesn't do well, we keep experimenting with it, right? Now, how does he know that if he's doing well enough? So when I'm talking about again going back to the street vendor example, the only time that he's confident and is sure that he's doing the right thing is that when he has cash in his pocket at the end of the day. That is very, very important. So no cash typically in a context like that of our country is that he might not have enough to eat by the end of the day. And the bigger question for him is how will he buy goods for the next day? How will he survive in business, right? Again, as I said that, things are not too different for companies, because companies also might face a very, very similar situation. They might be strapped for cash and might end up in a situation very similar to that of the street vendor. How? The first way that company might get strapped, get cash strapped, is that they could have produced too many things which didn't sell, like, so their cash got absorbed in the inventories that they produced. So that is one way that they can get cash trapped, right? The second way could be they could have invested in a plant which is too big and which is not being able to generate enough money for them, right? Or the third thing could be, and which I have come across in my experience, that you sell products on credit to retailers and distributors, right? And you get paid late. And that might result in a situation where you are kind of strapped for cash. So as I said, that both the street vendor and big business are on the same page when you're getting strapped on cash, because without cash, they are not going to survive in business. So the only option that they have when they face a situation similar to this is that they borrow money, right? So they
Yes.
borrow money, right? Now the organization has to kind of, again, it applies both for the street vendor as well as the organization, that they need to borrow money and obviously they need to pay back so what they borrowed with some leftover, again, in the interest of survival of business. So again, let us, coming back to the fruit vendor example, say every time he sells a melon, he makes just a bit of money, right? His profit is the difference between what he pays for the fruit and what he sells for it. That profit is very, very low. So his profit margin is basically the cash he gets to keep as a percentage of the total cash that he takes in, right? Say for example, that is 5%, right? And you may call it return on sales or operating margin, and that keeps on varying. So let's say the last example that I want to take is that let's say a street vendor borrows 400 rupees, which he uses that, and he uses that money to deposit on 4,000 rupees worth of fruit that he borrows. Now the fruit is his only asset. So if he sells all of rupees 4,000 worth of fruit at a 2% profit margin, like after deducting all the expenses and his salary, then he will make a profit of rupees 80, right? And in other words, he has used rupees 400 worth of asset to make rupees 80, and hence his return on assets is 20%. So the point I'm trying to make is the fundamentals of business is, so it is like we are dealing with a singular block of business. For companies, realities are the same, right? Only that it happens at a magnified scale. So this is like just wanted to sum up my retail journey and experience and my learning through the help of an example. Otherwise, I just didn't want to get into too much of data crunching and number crunching, because I have been on the other side of the table, and I know what to expect.
I'm sure, Shambit, I mean, a lot of our audience there would agree. I mean, you talked about market focus, to pricing, to arranging the product mix. You know, even you talked about display. You know, wherein the best and the most red-looking watermelon is displayed on the fruit cart for the potential customer, so that you know he's tempted to buy one, and then ROI, of course. So thank you very much, Shambit. That was a fantastic. In fact, if a startup guy is tuning in right now at ISBN Kolkata Facebook page, he would have a comprehensive idea, I'm sure. Shambit, the point or the topic for today's webinar is know the market to grow the market. You talked about know the market, but what about grow the market? That is a paradigm shift in e-commerce. Especially in this lockdown period, what became the quintessential thing for middle class and upper class is we had cash, yes, but we didn't have the markets open. In the very earlier period of the lockdown, there were very few shops open, very few places where we could buy even our essentials. And e-commerce became a very important tool. People who didn't buy online were left with no choice but engage in e-commerce. So although e-commerce started the journey, if we can say from 1990s, when the internet was open commercial, from there to this day, if you could talk about, again, a quick journey, a quick recap of what has led to the e-commerce boom right now.
Right. So I'll just to quickly give a bit of background about e-commerce. I think
of course, I'm just cutting you here with a focus on India, of course.
Sure, I'll do that. So basically, the market size of the current Indian e-com industry, if we look at the journey and if we look at how it has evolved over the last few years. So like around 2014, the total size of the industry was about $14 billion, right? And in 2020, we have reached like $70 billion, right? So that has been exponential, there has been an exponential growth in terms of the market size of the Indian e-com industry. Now, there are two fundamental reasons which has led to this growth, right? The first one is the increase in smartphone penetration, right? And the second one is, of course, the number of internet users in India. So if you look at the data points, like in 2013, there used to be some 170 million internet users. That has come up to almost like currently it is like around 600 million internet users as we speak in 2020. And by 2022, it is expected to touch like 700 millions. So from 170 in 2013 to 700 in like about a decade's time, I think that's more than impressive. And the second factor fueling this growth of Indian e-com industry is, as I said, the increase in the number of smartphone users in the country. So again, like from 2017, the number was around 300 million number of smartphone users, and in 2020, as we speak, it is around 424 million, right? So just to give you an example, 424 million, if I convert that in crores, it is like 42.4 crores. Given that India's population is like 138 crores, so that's like 30% of the total Indian population who are using the smartphone right now, right?
That's huge.
Yeah. So the retail scenario, as I mentioned earlier, like about like 2-3 years back, it used to be like 2.93% of the e-com. The online retail was like 2.9 to 3% of the total retail business. So now that number has increased. It is nearly 4.5%, and we're expecting it to touch a 5% by next year. So I'm saying that if the total size of the pie is 100, if I'm generating a business of 100 through retail industry, e-com is contributing can be expected to contribute 5 rupees out of that 100 pie, right? So that's one perspective. The other thing is that e-com. If we talk a little about the global trend, So e-com as a percentage of total retail sales, right? In a country like US, it currently stands at 9%, right? So it is, I would say, moderately penetrated. As a percentage of total retail sale in a country like China is 23%. So it's quite heavily penetrated compared to US. So as opposed to that,
That's
India,
surprising.
it's a quite a modest start because we are still at like 2.9, we were at 2.9% about a year back, and we are like 3.5% right now. So compared to China and US, yes, we are kind of lagging behind, but there's a lot to catch up. Again, the fashion share of e-commerce, since I was a part of the fashion industry, so I would like to talk a little about that. So the fashion share in e-commerce in US is like 20%. In China, it is like the fashion share is 25%, and India, it is like 18%. So there's a lot of
80%.
that has happened in the fashion space. And last but not the least, yeah, pardon?
80.
No, 18. No, not
Okay.
80. Not 80, yeah. And e-com penetration in fashion retail, like for US it's 17%, for China it's 30%, and as opposed to that, India is still like lingering around 3%, right? Now, if we talk about now all the major e-com players in the country right now, they are extremely focused to take this e-com penetration in fashion retail 3% up to like 15% by 2023, right? So that is like e-com fashion penetration. They plan to take this figure up from 3% to 15% by 2023, like within like another 2-3 years of time span. And how they plan to do it? So there are basically 3 levers of growth. First being tier 2 and 3 customer growth, right? So the next, so 70%, like the next 150 million smartphone users is expected to come from tier 2 and tier 3 cities, right? So that is one lever of growth, how they're planning to increase the fashion e-com penetration. The second lever of growth is online fashion shoppers. Now currently, the online fashion shoppers is like 35 million, the figure. They expect that that figure will go from 35 to 100 million over like next 2-3 years by 2023. And the third, the last, and the not the least, the final lever of growth is the increase in the average transaction value of the basket. So for example, currently customers are spending like on an average $32 per transaction. Now that figure is expected to go up to some $60 by 2023. So based on these 3 levers of growth, I think they are planning, all the major internet e-com players are planning to increase their fashion penetration to a figure of 15%. Just a small overview of the Indian e-com industry.
Thank you, Shombi. That was a brilliant projection. In fact, we are looking at more than 4 times growth in 3 years, which is quite ambitious. Quite ambitious. Phenomenal, I would say. This brings me to the next question, the next obvious question.
Before we go carry on, Professor Shobhan Nandi from ISBM Kolkata, Professor, he wanted to know, he says, during this lockdown period, e-commerce failed us. What saved us was local kiranas and street vendors. What are the pointers for e-commerce failure? Bad supply chain management?
Can you please repeat the last part of the sentence, ma'am? The question.
He says, what are the pointers for e-commerce failure? Bad supply management?
Okay. So there are like, the major issue that we were facing post the declaration of lockdown was obviously the manpower crunch, right? There were less manpower that started reporting to our factories, to our distribution points, and like to our branch offices, sales offices, and hence that was a huge challenge to kind of deal with, cope with. And the other challenge was to get the proper regulatory permission required from the authorities to resume your production in the factories. So I think I can talk about the industry as a whole. There has been a great deal of agility that has been displayed in terms of procuring the required permissions on time, and then trying to make ends meet with kind of less resource to optimize the limited resource that was available at our disposal. And I think innovation, again, is one point that I must bring up, because given the extremely trying circumstances that we were living with, and it was quite surprising to see the kind of speed at which people innovated. So there are some technological solutions which usually takes a year, year and a half to kind of develop. Those were kind of developed within a matter of weeks. So yes, overall, I think it's a combination of these three factors which kind of helped us, bouncing back, so to speak. So, yeah.
We have another question for you, Sambit, this time from somebody you know, that's Rahul Chandra. He starts off by saying, hey, Sambit, good to hear from you. And his comment is, India's e-commerce, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah?
Ma'am, did you say Rahul Chandra?
Yes.
Okay. He used to be the placement coordinator in our time.
Yes, yes, exactly.
We're part of the same team, yes.
So he's pleased to see you. He says, India's e-commerce contribution to retail business as it stands is at a paltry 3%.
That's right.
Given that India had a head start over other emerging markets like Turkey, Russia, and Brazil, what are the key reasons why India wasn't able to accelerate e-commerce penetration across industries? Average shopper spends in US is $1,100 per year, whereas India's, which is below $50. Is it a shabby loyalty program a reason?
What's the question? Is it a shabby?
Is shabby loyalty program a reason?
No. So basically, in consumers, typically, if we look at the way they have behaved historically, they are extremely, I would say, sensitive about the touch and feel of the product, right? So the biggest roadblock for e-com to grow has been, the fact that the people could not experience, so for example, let me talk about, say, apparel industry, right? So the statistics used to kind of, statistics talks about the fact that almost 70% of people who try a garment end up buying it. Now in e-commerce, you don't have an option of a trial, right? So obviously the initial, I would say, reluctance or hesitance, as far as typically the psyche of the Indian consumers are concerned, has been that, because the touch and feel for us is supreme. It's very, very important. So that, but I think it's like a matter of time that this evolves, because I think Rahul is right in pointing out that the emerging markets, particularly, so to speak, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, they are projected to play a massive role in the days to come as far as e-commerce growth is concerned. Because I think the expectation is some 3 billion buyers, internet buyers from the emerging markets will have access to the internet. So that is one, and they are expected to fuel almost 20% of the overall e-com growth globally. Yes.
Great, Shobhit. So looking at very bright prospects there, which brings me to my question, which I wanted to ask, and some of the words that you said kind of fuels this question. You said innovation, you said lack of touch and feel. So if we put that all together, and if you look at the future of e-commerce, and you also talked about how disruption in the supply chain led to a temporary disruption during the lockdown period. So if you talk about the future, what do you think the future of e-commerce looks like? Would it be drones delivering the products instead of people, or VR, virtual reality software where you can try the product on in the camera and look about the cut and feel and the how it fits you, and then
yes, virtual.
Yes,
it's called virtual clothes or whatever.
Yes, applying virtual reality to get the
yes,
look and feel and cut and how it fits you for apparel industry. So are we looking at maybe in the next years ahead, even people will buy cars, for example, through e-commerce? Is it possible? Or industry, it's just I think me and Preetham, we were talking about when we talk about high fashion, everything is customized, absolutely specifically to a body type in mind with detail. There, how does e-commerce look at in the future, tap those markets?
Okay. So first, I think let me take up the physical versus online debate, because that's inevitable. We need to address that question sooner or later. So I think the growth of e-com is definitely far outpacing the sales from brick and mortar. But having said that, I think brick and mortar stores are extremely valuable assets for e-com brands, right? So the way I look at it is that instead of functioning as a real life version of online stores, the brick and mortar stores will switch towards, I think, offering unique shopping experience. That's the road they're expected to take. So for example, to give you an example, Nike, right? They have expanded their base right from New York till Shanghai with their brand new experiential, shopping locations, and they term it as houses of innovation. Now, Nike's physical stores, if you look at, and there are some wonderful videos available even in YouTube. So you can pick up exclusive. You can kind of customize products with your own hands. You can partake in fitness tests. You can try out brand new products by playing fun games. So these are the experiences that you can't get online, right? So it will definitely go a long way in solidifying loyalty. So that's the role I see offline, brick and mortar stores is expected to take up, as far as like the holistic picture is concerned, and they will continue to focus on unique shopping experience, which cannot be kind of which you cannot expect in an online setup. So that's one. And I think you've raised a very important point, ma'am, when you talked about automation. I think automation is going to be a key growing element for online business. Like if you look at large warehouse, so I've seen these Amazon and Alibaba warehouses. They keep floating in the social media that they are investing a lot in robotics, and they're doing it to become more efficient. They are kind of freeing up the staff who can obviously take up more important tasks, right? And the other corollary that flows out of it is the shipping and fulfillment, right? Now FCs, as they call it, fulfillment centers, is how they term their warehouses. They are getting increasingly smarter and more automated to deliver items in the shortest possible time. Like you rightly pointed out, ma'am, Amazon is currently experimenting with Prime Air, as we know it. It is a future delivery system which is designed to get packages to customer in 30 minutes. And they are you're planning to use unmanned aerial vehicles, which is like drones, which are like drones. So that's exactly a project that is currently being experimented with. They've already, this testing is are definitely on its way. So yes, I think pretty much exciting times as far as e-com is concerned. And yes, and I think last but not the least, the point I would like to touch upon is personalization. I think is going to be very, very important, because there are algorithms which are in place, which is collecting data about your behavior, and they probably know more about your tastes and preferences than probably your closest friends and families do. So that's how even the marketing campaigns are getting optimized. I'll just give you a small example. Like I work very closely with Amazon, and they have this algorithm. Like for example, this is from FMCG perspective. They have this very unique price matching mechanism or price matching algorithm. So for example, any particular product, be it a biscuit or a noodle or a snack, if that same SKU is available at a lower price point in any other e-com portal, their algorithm will automatically go ahead and match that price. So that's something very, very unique. And these are realities that we are living with. So this space is evolving very, very fast. And I think as far as marketing is concerned, I think videos are on the rise. I think video is projected to play a massive role in future of e-com, because research says that like 60% of shoppers would rather watch a branded social video or product video than read a product description. So I think these are the few changes that I have in my mind when you talk about the future of e-com.
Yes, Preeta.
I have a question. I have comments. I would like to share them with you. JP Rath, Professor JP Rath from the Nanbe campus, he has commented and said that he thinks that, going to a mall is a sort of an experience which can't really be compensated with buying online. Because, you go into an air-conditioned mall with friends or family, you shop, you see, you have restaurants, you see a movie. So it's a complete experience. So perhaps the malls are presenting some kind of, well, not threat, but competition to e-commerce, because that is a different experience, which of course we don't have the pleasure of experiencing right now. But that was definitely very attractive. Professor Shomik Gangopadhyay has asked, what is the strategy to reach Indian rural customers without compromising profit, as real untapped potentiality lies there? And this is very important, because I come from a village in the middle of Rajasthan where the post office is also miles away and nobody knows where I am, truly.
Okay.
And it's a very important question because I believe right now the essential items list has been revised by the government to boost the rural economy. And one of the key sectors that has not been hit by any crisis is the agricultural sector. That is one of the big backbone of our economy.
Yes.
And we can link that with the market. And if the profits can be directly transferred to the farmers, I think that is a future that we are looking at with a lot of possibility, where e-commerce can play the role of the mediator instead of corrupt mediators who cheat both the.
But then also in the rural area, the conception of, oh dear, perhaps they can't afford it, but the rural areas, people do have cash in hand, because they're not just limited to farming. They've all started different industries side by side. They've opened workshops, they've opened shops, so the liquidity of cash is in their hands. So it is a good market. It is a market which is really worth exploring.
Which, if I can just club in one question from my side with that, well, since Rita was talking about the cash reach, I completely understand it. But the question of the trust in the cyber security, about investing that cash to buy something online, that's, I think, a huge psyche block that we have, especially in India. So probably in the digital India, is that possible? So how do you see that as a challenge? So lots of questions for you, Shombit, to answer.
No, but then you have cash on delivery. That option is there. Yeah, cash on delivery. That's there.
That's right.
You think of where our campus is. Shombit, I don't know whether you know, but we now have our own campus, fully residential, beautiful, by the river Ganges. It really is a lovely place. And you have Amazon coming there.
Which is
cash on delivery.
Yes. That's fantastically pointed out, Rita.
Yeah, all our students there, nearly 150 of them, they're all sort of using Amazon. They're using various other e-portals. They're doing all kinds of things. It's quite amazing. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's these questions are extremely valid and extremely critical. As far as e-com space is concerned. First is pertaining as to your question about the how to address the rural market. So I think there is an extensive research that I know of which is happening in some which like has been taken up by some lead e-com players in India pertaining to two spaces specifically. One is that so they know that a larger sizable part of our rural population, they are not well versed with with English, right? And for them to acts as a barrier, while engaging seamlessly with e-com platforms. So now a lot of research and development is happening on voice recognition technology and related to vernacular language. So for example, if I am, say, a migrant labor in some remote corner of Uttar Pradesh, I need not be proficient in English or for that matter, proficient in the way I operate my smartphone or mobile phone. I just need to pick up my phone and speak in the language that I am comfortable with, and speak out and speak to the mouth, device, and the device will recognize my requirement and it will act accordingly. So vernacular voice recognition, I think technology is one thing that people have invested very heavily, and they are kind of working overtime on that. So that is like, because I have heard this, in one of the conclaves, the Flipkart CEO, he himself said that, the first milestone is done. Now for us to get to the next level, this is the area, the rural market is something that we'll have to crack. And it cannot be done without, innovating in the areas that I have mentioned. So that's number one. Number two, if you typically look at the kind of mobile phones that are not smartphone, the mobile, smartphones that are kind of used by, the SEC of Tier 2, Tier 3 cities. So one issue that perennially comes up is the issue of storage, right? They have only limited storage, and there are certain applications that has to be there, for the regular, day-to-day requirement. Like say a WhatsApp, I think is indispensable. Now, the other area where a lot of research is happening is how you can reduce the storage space that is taken up, by the app, so that it can peacefully coexist. Because one constraint is the overall storage space is limited for smartphones that are used particularly in those, particularly catering to those segments. So within that constraint, how can you further reduce your overall storage space so that your one doesn't deprioritize your app should somebody face a constraint in terms of storage space in their smartphone? So these are the two areas where I think some leading research is happening as we speak. And was there anything else? I think this was the question, right?
Yes, I think it answers perfectly.
There are more questions online. There are questions, there are comments. Rahul Chandra has said that when we were talking about the malls, he has said, valid point, research online, buy offline. That is the model. Then he's also talked about your take on shifting marketing dollars on intelligence, customer experience, and content from classic demand generation initiatives. Should I read it out again?
I think I'm not being able to hear. Can you just repeat the question?
Okay. Your take on shifting marketing dollars on intelligence, customer experience, and content from classic demand generation initiatives.
Okay. So my take on, I'm still not very clear about the question.
Your take on shifting market dollars on intelligence, customer experience, and content from classic demand generation initiatives.
Okay. So I think they are absolutely correlated. I mean, we cannot distinguish one from the other. It has to happen in kind of, in coordination with each other. So while I definitely will have to, as I said, invest in market intelligence, I have to kind of identify the customer segments that I want to target, right? I need to be very, very clear exactly who my product is kind of is targeted to. Just to give you an example, to answer this question. So one was intelligence, one was marketing, and what was the third element, ma'am?
He's disappeared. Just one sec. One was marketing dollars on intelligence, customer experience. And content. Yeah.
Okay. So this is with respect. Okay. So for example, we did a campaign a few days back. So there was a new. We planned to launch a product which was like in the biscuit segment, and we wanted to talk about the health benefits, right? So we kind of did a cohort-based targeting, wherein we identified all those people. So basically, this was a biscuit was kind of positioned around the fact that it is extremely healthy for diabetic people, right? So we kind of, as far as market intelligence is concerned, we made some attempt to dig out or mine some data on which are the customers who have kind of purchased or searched for, say, a glucometer on the internet, on the web, on that particular platform, right? And based on that, so that is the market intelligence part. And we devise, like, content marketing is extremely critical, right? So we devised our marketing strategy in tune with the insights that we had received, and that's how the entire campaign was launched. So this, all the three facets, I think this planning has to be done in coordination with each other, and I think they go hand in hand. So I would not be able to kind of prioritize A or B over C in terms of deploying my money. I think it has to be done in tandem.
By the way, let me take this opportunity to thank our dear audience. You've been fantastic. Your response is really encouraging and inspiring. Please keep engaging with us with more questions and more comments.
I have them.
Over to you, Preeta.
Professor Shovan Nandi, again of the Calcutta campus, ISBNM, has asked that can the eChoupal platform, which does exist in most villages, can that be used for consumers, rural consumers, to shop and buy? That is where they get competitive prices for products, so they know which hart or mandi to go to. So can that platform also be used for shopping and buying?
Okay, okay, I think eChoupal is a very diverse and extremely different. I guess people are, I don't know if they're aware, eChoupal is one of the case studies that has been taken up in Harvard. You know, that's one of the extremely successful business models as far as ITC is concerned. So I would have reasons to assume that if a particular model has been designed in a certain way and it has worked to keep it that way rather than experimenting with it, right? And obviously there can be alternative models that can come up in future, but something that has worked so nicely for us, I don't think it will be judicious to tamper with it, and it would be too controversial for me to comment on it.
Okay, a question from Mr. Naveen Verma, who is also from the Nandi campus. Is there a change in the distribution channel design in terms of spread of warehousing across the country to make it more decentralized?
Oh, fantastic. That's a brilliant question. I think, yes, absolutely bang on. There are a lot of kind of initiatives and innovations that are happening in that space. Just to give a couple of examples. So one is that one problem that we used to face was that typically, say Amazon their warehouses were not equipped with cold chain capabilities. So that became a roadblock for taking our products, particularly in chocolates, taking them to the consumer, right? Because I cannot supply it to their warehouse because they don't have cold chain. They will not be able to store it, right? So so there are a lot of third-party sellers. So Amazon being a marketplace, there are a lot of third-party sellers who have kind of come up and they have kind of plugged the gap. So what we are doing instead is we are supplying products to those third-party sellers, and these sellers are listing themselves on the portal, on the platform, and they are making the product available directly to the consumer. That's one innovative model that has kind of plugged one distribution, I would say, challenge that we have faced. I just explained with the help of an example. The other thing, I think there are a lot of experiments that is happening in this space. One such experiments that we had taken up, for example, I remember it was about a couple of years back. So we had come up with a smart warehouse or a warehouse in warehouse kind of a model. So typically, the issue is that there are a lot of challenges that one faces in the traditional distribution system. So there are challenges like, to name a few, fragmented inventory, lead time, logistics cost, financial exposure, limited catalog, inventory rotation. So all these are challenges that kind of plagues us. So what we did was, so the concept of a smart warehouse is that a part of our own warehouse, right? We kind of segregate some geographical space out of our existing warehouse, and we dedicate that space to kind of shift a part of the inventory and making it live directly to the portal. So what I'm doing is essentially, I am not moving my product out of my warehouse. I am not supplying it to the partner. So for example, when I was in apparel, I was leading these two brands, Wills Lifestyle and John Players. And so basically the point that the issue that we faced is that the time to go live, time to partner was varied from 30 days, from 7 to 30 days, right? We will receive a purchase order, we will get the stock allocated, we will supply that stock, and that warehouse might be in some other, distant location. So this entire time. So for example, if there is a sudden, if there is a kind of a peak demand situation, you tend to miss out on that. So suppose there is a peak, there is a demand, the curve, the trajectory goes up, say for a 7-day period, you will not be able to capture that, peak demand to your advantage. Because by the time you supply, that advantage, that demand curve has flattened, right? So what we did, we kind of dedicated a space within our warehouse. We called it Smart Warehouse. And then the time to partner, time to go to market reduced from 30 days to 1 day, single day. And I am kind of immediately making my product live within my warehouse. So these are extremely innovative solutions that are coming up to plug the distribution challenges that I think has been pointed out.
Okay. Another observation from Professor J.P. Rott, where he says, once virtual reality penetrates individual homes, which means it becomes cheap and well accessible, e-commerce shall tip towards 80% plus, maybe more. A very, very positive and wonderful comment. Wait for another 10 to 15 years. The economy shall go through an unprecedented expansion. This should get the rural market as well, easily. This is his comment. And Professor Soumik Gangopadhyay of the Kolkata campus has commented and said, in the post-COVID-19, when community is in a compromised state, purchasing essentials from local kirana shops on credit, how will online retail strategies them for competitive positioning? I haven't understood that question myself.
Well, I think what he means here is that, when you go to the local kirana and you don't have money and the guy knows you by face or your family, he would happily lend you goods, say for a 30 days period. Yes. When he knows that he's assured of that return. But in e-commerce, such a thing is not
possible.
So how do you then compete with this? What is your strategy for that?
Ma'am, I think I'll just put on the earphone. I think I'm not being able to hear properly.
Should we repeat that question for you?
Yes, please. I think I'm not being able to hear.
I think, Avirupa, if you would rephrase it for him.
Sure. So the question here is, according to Mr. Soumik Gangopadhyay, the kirana shops have this unique advantage where that shopkeeper knows you or your family, and he's assured that even if he gives you goods for credit, you will pay that guy after a month or whatever tenure. But this facility is not available in e-commerce, especially if you look at the crisis, any crisis, be it the pandemic or any crisis, or even the Amphan. So temporarily you don't have cash, the ATM is not working. So you go to your local kirana shop and say, please give me my daily supply or whatever. And he will happily give that to you because he knows once the ATM starts working, he will be compensated. But this facility or this trust factor is absent in case of e-commerce. Then how do you bridge that as a strategy?
No, absolutely bang on. Absolutely bang on. Extremely valid question. And I think if you look at the kind of projections that has been given by Nielsen, there are two, areas where they put a lot of emphasis in terms of scalable growth for the days to come. One is the neighborhood kirana store. There is no taking away from it. Yes. But my take on this is not a competition. It is just both are here to exist. Just that they offer a different set of, both are offering different bundles of values, right? a neighborhood kirana is giving me a set of a particular specific bundle of value. E-com is giving me some convenience, right? So it is, both are here to peacefully, they are here to coexist. It is not a debate of one versus the other. But yes, point completely taken. In view of the COVID, post-COVID, the scenario, it is a projection from Nielsen that the neighborhood kirana store is only going to emerge stronger out of this. Yes, that's fact.
Actually, in a way, it looks reassuring. So you're saying that e-commerce is not going to eat away into the market of the kirana store. However, e-commerce itself is going to create new market. That's what I have understood.
So e-commerce growth is now not restricted to B2C. E-commerce has also gotten into B2B, right? Wherein e-commerce is directly, there is an Amazon B2B segment, right? There is something called Jumbo Tail, right? So all these people, there is something called, this thing, what do you call it? I think the name escapes me right now.
But even there, Shombit, if I can just ask you this. So the local kirana...
Sorry, Udaan. So Udaan, Jumbo Tail, Amazon B2B, they are directly supplying to the distributors who are kind of supplying in turn to the local retailers. So e-com is not one-dimensional right now. E-com, the B2B space is also evolving very, very fast. Although right now it is small enough to be ignored by a larger section of the Janta, but I think in the days to come, that is going to, will not be in a position to ignore it for a very long time. Sorry, ma'am. I think. Yeah.
Okay. Now this is again from Rahul. He says that e-commerce is currently consolidated among the big boys.
Okay.
Namely Amazon, Flipkart, Alibaba, etc., which has impacted tier 2 retails and SME business.
Right.
How can SMEs reap the dividends of e-commerce penetration?
SMEs as in like?
Small and medium enterprises.
How can they? Okay, so it is like, so small and medium enterprise. So for example, there are two kinds of e-com accounts, right? One is the inventory model, like that of a Groffer or a Big Basket. And the other one is like a marketplace, which is like a Flipkart and Amazon. Now, what happens in a marketplace? Anybody can go, they can open their shop. They can take advantage of the huge influx of the footfall that is coming in, and they can take advantage of it. So Amazon is offering you a marketplace. You can come open your shop and make the most of it. So be it a small business or a large business, they don't differentiate. I mean, there are like some 2 crore products which are listed in Amazon. There are some 10 million sellers. Out of 10 million, not all of them are big enterprises, right? There are small and medium enterprises. So they are taking the advantage. And as they say it, a rising tide lifts all the boats. So be it. So even for small and medium enterprises, I think they will take full advantage of the rising tide. Yes.
We have a solution to the problem we are talking about earlier, where the Kirana gives you credit for a month or so. So again, Professor Rath has stepped in and said, banks step in to give EMI for e-commerce because you use your debit card. And if you have one, that is in a sense getting credit because you use your credit card.
Okay.
And you can pay it later.
Right.
So the credit card would step in for where the Kirana is giving you a month's leeway or whatever to pay your bills.
That's a valid point, yes.
But then I don't know how many people in the villages have credit cards.
Okay.
I'm sure a lot of them will have. And
yes,
given the projection Shombit is giving, increasing business threefold, fourfold in 3 years, I think that's huge potential we are looking at, which makes us tap at one very important question, which is important for our audience here as well, which is employment. So, Rita, would you really want to talk about this?
Yes. Now, Shombit, throughout your talk, you have mentioned the supply chain, you've mentioned talking to customers, you've talked about innovation, you've talked about everything under the sun. Now, you have in your career been associated with retail, fashion, and then e-commerce, both for retail and now for FMCG. Now for freshers coming in, especially when you've talked about the slew of different things that you've done or the knowledge that you have needed to complete your tasks, what are the skills that the freshers should have and should develop so that they are able to, adequately fill their roles?
Okay. So I think it is. It might sound a little cliched, but I would kind of. It boils down to basically 4 C's, which is critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And I don't want to sound extremely, jargonish here. So I would like to elucidate with the help of examples. So
How can we make people think critically
okay,
when
so
they
I'll
have spent the first 11 plus 3, 14 years of their lives just memorizing their notes and textbooks?
Yes, absolutely valid point. Absolutely valid point. In fact, that's absolutely bang on, ma'am. I think today we are completely flooded by enormous amount of information, and that is a problem with our education system. We don't need any further information. We have far too much, and you're absolutely right. So people need the ability to make sense of that information, and that is a skill set that is very very critical. One has to tell the difference between what is important and what is not important, and above all, one needs to combine bits of this information to arrive at a broad picture. So that is something that needs to be cultivated, that needs to be developed, is what I have felt. Because otherwise one tends to get lost, because there are so much of data that is available at your disposal, and if you can't kind of process that data and arrive at a decision, then you end up wasting a lot of time, and which eventually takes a hit on your efficiency. So that's what I meant by critical thinking, and communication. I think you will appreciate this point. So
Definitely.
when I say communication, I say both in terms of verbal communication as well as written communication, right? So I'll just give you some examples. So one is that there are certain tips that are used by Amazon writers, right? I'll just use a couple of tips with the help of an example. So one is that you should use less than 30 words per sentence. Now, what does that mean? Now, I am using a phrase like due to the fact that. So it is said, you replace that with because. That's it. If you are saying totally lack the ability to, please replace it with would not. That's it. Make it very, very crisp, right? Your
Crisp and
communication,
brief
yes,
and
has to be
concise.
less than very, very concise. Second point is you replace adjectives with data. So now we make statements like we made performance much faster. Doesn't mean a thing. You talk about we reduced the server side latency from 10 ms to 1 ms. That's how you should use data, no adjectives. Third point is you eliminate like weasel words, like nearly all customers. Doesn't mean a thing. You talk about 87% of loyalty program members. That makes sense. 87% of Prime Now members, right? So these are some, and then most important, when you are kind of writing a proposal, a business proposal, it is very very important that it survives or it passes the so what test, right? So I used to remember when I used to give my presentations to my erstwhile CEO, after every point I made, he would look at me and say, so what, right? And then after like this 4 and 5 so whats, you tend to completely start losing it, because if you're not very very clear to the fundamental, what exactly is the point you're trying to drive home, so you tend to get lost beyond the point. And last but not the least, if you get a question, okay, so there is a reply that you can give a reply with 4 Amazon answers. So any question that is thrown at you can be replied with 4 different set of answers. One is a yes, 2 is a no, third is a number, and the fourth one is an I don't know, which obviously means I'll follow up. There is no fifth answers because you don't have the time. So communication is very very critical as a skill, right? Because and the corollary of that, what flows out is that if you can't explain something in very very simple terms, that probably means that you have not understood it, right? I see a lot of people using a lot of jargons, and that brings me back to my fundamental doubt about the understanding level of that individual. No personal references, but I think it is very, very important, and I believe that if you can't explain it to an 11 or 12-year-old, be it a business concept, a very complicated business proposal, then probably it is you and your communication that needs to be kind of, addressed. The third point is creativity, which broadly in terms of the ability to deal with change, to learn new things and to persevere. I think that is very, very critical. When I say to persevere, it is important to persevere. It is important to kind of preserve your mental balance in situations which are unfamiliar to you, right? So it is important that I think in order to keep up, you need not merely invent new ideas and products. Okay, so you will have to reinvent yourself time and again. And that understanding is very, very critical. And I think the last but not the least, collaboration is important, because I think the biggest factor that contributes to the success of any business, in whether online or offline, is whether it's their employees are able to perform together as a team. So this is where your interpersonal skill plays a very, very huge role. So, and when I say collaboration, I don't mean that it should be restricted within the internal stakeholders of the organization. It also means you extend that collaboration to your business partners. So just to give you an example, that we had, taken an initiative where, we had come together with Flipkart, ITC and Flipkart had come together to create a completely an e-com exclusive line. Right now, how did we approach it? Flipkart provided us with the insights as to what the consumer wants. Our team got together, our design team, merchandising team, sales team, marketing team, they got together and created a line which is absolutely exclusive to e-commerce, which is called a specially manufactured line. And that was a very, very successful line. So I am saying it is very, very important to collaborate as well as co-create, not only internally, but also with your, business partners, external stakeholders.
Okay, Shombit, what do you think of, the importance of understanding and studying supply chain operations management, business analytics, data management and analysis? These are the skills which are needed nowadays.
Yes, absolutely. As I said, so these aspects are extremely, extremely critical as far as e-commerce is concerned. I think there is a lot of interesting development that is happening. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I have questions, comments. I am going to read them out to you.
Okay.
And leave you to decide.
Okay.
Professor J.P. Rath says, bank steps in to give EMI commerce, where he talks about a credit card gives you credit. Okay. Professor Neha Arora has said, if you look at the e-commerce market in India, it is dominated by foreign players. Amazon, Flipkart, which is of course was Indian, but has been taken over. Now, vocal for local is the new mantra. How can informal kirana stores leverage this opportunity?
No, I didn't quite understand that question, because see, for example, as ITC, all our products are vocal for local. So every product that we make are built, in this country, right? And we are basically retailing those products in those marketplaces. We are using them as a platform to kind of connect to the consumers. So it is basically a product which has been manufactured locally, which is extremely passionate about the local sentiments, which is using that as a platform to connect and to reach out to the consumer. So it is not that, yes, of course, they have their own private labels, which also is kind of offering fierce competition these days. Now, given that, definitely is like a cause of concern, because yes, if that is maybe the vocal for local sentiment and the philosophy doesn't apply as much there. But as far as we are concerned, I think all our products are locally procured and manufactured.
Rahul has commented and asked, he says, marketplace players struggle to win buy button versus retail. Is being a part of the marketplace actually a solution?
Buy button, I didn't understand that.
I couldn't understand that unless he's mistyped it. I'll carry on to the next question, which is from Professor Shovan Nandi from the Calcutta campus. What is your take on Jio Marketplace?
Oh, okay. So I think this space is going to get interesting over a period of time, and I think the general understanding is that the pie is only going to grow, right? So it is not about the existing pie, and there's an extremely bitter and fierce warfare over capturing the same. I think the overall pie, with the introduction of new players like the one you mentioned, the overall pie is only going to get bigger, and then all the players are going to reap advantage of it.
Okay, Professor Sharmila Sinha has said that the cashback, even on Amazon and thing, they said if you use a credit card from a particular bank, you get 10% off. You buy petrol, the same thing. With a particular card, you get money back. So that is an initiative that is being promoted to motivate digital payments. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think I would agree with it. Yes, I think that makes sense. Yes.
Shumit, while we are talking about your work and the e-commerce portal in general, the big umbrella, if you just, would you take the nostalgic road back to your college days, that is your campus days, where all this, the incubation period for the successful Shomit that today there is. If you could talk a little about that, I think Brita would be able to better connect with that because she used to be your professor at that time. Brita, would you handhold him to the college days, please?
He doesn't need any hand-holding, I can assure you. But he did spend 2 very crucial years with ISBM Kolkata. And we would love you to share your experiences with us about those very, very important years.
Okay. But I do feel, ma'am, like with no sense of undue modesty, that the compliments showered on me are greatly in excess of my performance. But I won't say that I didn't enjoy hearing them. However, undeserving of them.
Rahul has said amazing insights to you.
Okay. I think Rahul we should get into a chat separately.
So has Professor Ashish Mitra and various other people who have really appreciated your contribution to this particular webinar. Thank you.
Extremely
but this
grateful.
Doesn't end it. Please do share your.
Extremely humbled. Thank you so much. Okay, so basically, as far as the ISBM experience goes, I think I was out of college for more than 2.5 years, and although I was working around that time, but I was not quite sure of what I actually wanted to do with my life, and ISBM kind of gave me a fresh start, and I have no qualms in admitting that I grabbed the opportunity with both hands. The most important, I think, impact that ISBM had on me, I think ISBM encouraged me to be genuine and to kind of accept me for what I am. Every other interview that I faced during that period, they kind of focused on the gaps and the shortcomings and what all I was not. So ISBM, it was it was a refreshing, change to see that, that I can show up as my true self, and I can kind of revel in my individuality. I can kind of embrace my own uniqueness, and gradually I think I regained my lost confidence, and I think that is very, very critical, and that is the first point. I think Dr. Pramod Kumar, and I can talk about him for I think hours at length, because I have so much of interesting experience and inspiring experience to share. And the entire faculty, team of faculty members, and what excellent faculty members we had. They I think had the dream of a meaningful life for me. I think even before I had it for myself. Okay, so I think all my teachers, and Rita ma'am is here, and I think I must admit whatever business communication I have learned, it is from her. So I think exceptional and wonderful teachers like her, I think they really believed in us. That made a difference, and I think they wanted us to succeed, and that's why they put in as much into this as we did, and that was truly a differentiator. And last but not the least, I think the placement cell membership, that kind of gave us a very unique exposure that is like quite
Let
unmatched.
me butt in here, Shomit.
Yes,
we have very strong memories of your work as a PACSEL member. and
Okay.
how you were so very persistent and dogged in your determination to achieve your objectives.
Thank
You
you.
went from company to company armed with your laptop and convinced them to come to the campus for recruitment. And you did a wonderful job of it. Now,
Thank you so
what
much.
was your takeaway from uh, experiences such as that, from activities such as that?
Okay. So, okay, takeaway is like, so for example, I'll just give you, so that's my favorite example. I keep putting the teabag story. Okay. The teabag example is that, what count is what is inside that teabag, right? So the quality of tea is determined by what's inside the bag and not by the label or for example, the strength. So they might look nice on you, but what really matters is the kind of person you are deep down, your beliefs and attitude. I think ISBM instilled that confidence in me to make me realize that it is true. This teabag example is true for me as well. So there are times when you will be somewhere that makes you feel like you don't belong. Well, you don't belong there. You are not good enough for the job. That you don't have the pedigree of other people in the room, and that somehow you are out of your league. It happens to pretty much to everyone, but it happened to me. I know, particularly when I sat around a large table in my office with 7 new colleagues, and I gradually remember I sank lower and lower in my chair as the introductions began, because there were like IIMs and FMSs is all I heard. But then I'll tell you what the ISBM difference that where that experience came in. I realized over a period of time that I could be there as myself and as my genuine self. That's it. Because as I said, what really mattered is my belief and attitude, and that is the confidence that ISBM gave me to kind of deal with such experiences. The other experience ISBM gave me is that, and this is like I must talk a little bit about PK here. Again, coming back to the tea bag example, it is the real flavor of the tea bag comes out only when you put it into hot water. So for us, the placement cell members, PK made sure that we are always in a perpetual state of living and breathing that kind of hot water experience. So likewise, the true character like of a professional shines through in adversity. That's one very big lesson we learned, because I remember the first time that we interacted with PK, and till that point we had kind of looked up to him from a distance. We had kind of had huge regards and huge admiration. He, ex-director SIBM, Pune, chairperson XLRI, PhD from IIT Hawaii, consultant to the 80 countries worldwide, so many quoted internationally in textbooks and journals, all that. So we were supposed to go to Pune, all the placement cell members, for the first time. There were 2 girls in the group, and we could not procure a confirmed train ticket. So we went up to him to communicate that we will not be able to undertake the journey because the tickets have not been confirmed. And he kind of matter-of-factly looked at us and said that he actually looked pretty shocked. He said, what is wrong with you guys? It's okay if the tickets are not confirmed. You just jump into the train, and it will teach you how to deal with uncertainties of life. And we were shocked, completely shocked. How could somebody, make such an outrageous statement? But we didn't realize the significance of it at that point. But I think the point he was trying to drive is that how a person behaves under pressure, that ultimately is extremely critical to survive in the corporate setup. And I think the point that he's also tried to instill in us is that a good tea bag is actually someone who looks forward to getting into hot water. So beyond the point, we started enjoying all these trials and tribulations. We were completely okay with it. That became became a way of life, right? And I think the other important ISBM takeaway is that, again, if I have to correlate it with the tea bag example, that tea bags must be porous. Even the best tea in the world, if you put them in a bag that is impermeable, it won't work. So in our work lives, we cannot thrive in isolation. So similarly, ISBM, we had such a lovely interplay of cross-functional, exposure and teamwork. that kind of, I think, gave us a lot of confidence and that learning that, that you will not only be remembered how good you were, but also how good, I mean, how your contribution has been in terms of building teams and institutions. So, so that is
Shobhit,
it.
how did you manage Paxel work, coursework, because you were a good student as well? So how did you do that? And you were jumping on and off trains, going off to visit companies, and yet you were there to do your studies as well, because academics are important. And you graduated at a very crucial time. If you remember, there was a financial crisis at that, and you graduated in 2010, which was exactly a year after the financial crisis. So it was a very tricky time. So how did you react to all that?
So I think, to my mind, I was not being able to kind of balance it perfectly well, and I was quite stressed, and I was not at all happy with the way things came across, and I thought I was doing a terrible job both as a Paxel member as well as I was not being able to do due justice to my academics, and I went up to PK and I said, "Sir, I'm not being able to manage, and I think I don't have it in me to kind of balance it out." So and then the issue with PK is even the most complicated problems, he will make it sound like, with his retort, you start behaving, you start feeling that, it has been extremely silly on your part to come up with a question like that. So he said, what is the issue in time management? He said, during the day, you should either be in the classroom attending a lecture, or you should be in the back room making a phone call to one of the corporates. That's it. That's how you should kind of plan your day. So either any time during the day, you ask yourself if you're fitting into either of these roles. I think if you can do that diligently, you will not have any issue in managing time. So I guess that definitely helped us to, and that applies to all of us, who kind of struggle to kind of balance it out, the academics and the Paxel work, which was extremely demanding.
So did that experience from ISBM, where you were quite young?
Yes.
I mean, you were a student and you were handling this, and your Paxel work actually required you to go and speak to very, very senior people, which normally you would not do. Has that helped you sort of become more confident, more adjustable, adaptable, agile, flexible, all that? Has that come from your ISBM experience?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I couldn't agree more with you. That is, so basically, when I stepped into my place of work, and people used to kind of, my seniors in the workplace, my professional colleagues, they tried to kind of boggle us down with all tales of horror, how stressful it can be, how difficult the situation is going to get. And we had that attitude ki I have seen it all, and just don't talk about stress. Okay? And that is the last thing that I have on my mind, because I think I have done a pretty decent job in beating down stress for the last couple of years. Yes, that definitely gave us that confidence.
Rahul Chandra has sent you his accolade where he says, only Sambit managed Paxel and academics. We struggled.
Shobhit is going to be even more humble now, I understand.
Well, Rahul Chandra managed to crack LG, which I could not.
Perhaps the best comes to you because it's meant to.
Shobhit, I mean, it's great to see that you still have so much ownership about ISBNM Kolkata, and you talk with so much fondness, and very importantly, with a lot of, you take pride in the brand and ISBNM Kolkata campus. It's wonderful to see us, and probably that's one of the reasons why you're here in this panel. And you are a living example of what lifestyle an ISBNM student can have. ISBNM Kolkata campus alumnus, you are our mascot, so to say, a great example, and
a great ambassador.
Yes, and
great ambassador.
So, as I said, ma'am, I think the compliments that are getting showered on me are greatly in excess of my performance, but then
Well,
how?
it seems ISBNM taught you a lot of self-assurance, self-reliance, and self-awareness, but not how to take a compliment in your stride. You know that you're still stressed about getting compliments. So,
That could be because you could never, no matter how much whatever kind of hard work that you put in, it was very difficult to please PK. I mean, and to get that that compliment out of him. So probably
it's a very important lesson actually. Effective managers are the ones who can navigate stress, and it has been even more important now, especially the lockdown period that we had. There was a lot of stress issues and all, where who you are and how you handle stress became a very big differentiator, not only as effective managers, but as effective human beings. Which brings me to a very interesting observation I can see right behind you. Is that a guitar
oh,
that I see behind you?
yes, that's right, ma'am.
Which means you are equally passionate about your.
No, I actually I tried my hands at it and I made an attempt to kind of kickstart, but that is at an absolutely nascent stage. So like it's still a long way to go. But yes, I have started kind of pursuing. That
Could
has
you talk
been
about your other passions and interests and hobbies?
okay. So I think I am deeply as far as my hobbies are concerned. I think I like reading. I take interest in a wide range of subjects. I am very passionate about poetry. That's a very sensitive topic because my love for poetry costed me my first job, and literally, well, Brita ma'am, I can see her smiling because she has got the entire background and context to it. Just to cut a long story short, in our final round in LG interview, I was asked the same question: what are you passionate? What are your hobbies? And I very proudly proclaimed that I'm very passionate about reciting poetry. And the then I think Dr. Y.V. Verma, he was the director HR. He said, "Oh, that's nice. Why don't you kind of share something with us?" And then I was with even more greater rigor and passion. I recited a couplet, and then to my mind, I was extremely satisfied that the interview could not have gone better. It was an extremely gratifying experience that, exactly I talked about my hobby and I got to recite a poetry, and as I said, it was perfect. It couldn't have gotten better. Finally, when the list came out that very night, I was in for a rude shock. I was extremely disappointed to see that I did not make it there. And then that night, I think the next day I had a chat with PK, and I said, and even he was quite surprised that I did not make it, but he didn't say a thing. And the next time PK visited our campus, that was like probably a month later, and we were having this placement meeting, and then suddenly PK looks at me and he tells me that, boss, you don't recite poetry in an interview, right? And I was absolutely shocked to kind of to my mind, I had never shared that with PK. I had never told him that, I did not take him through the granular details of what happened in the interview. So I was quite surprised and taken aback. How come he came to know about the fact that? And then it eventually turned out, and he took me out for a chat, and he said he had a chat with Dr. Verma, who happened to be a very close friend of his, and he said, "Ye to emotional banda hai. I mean, how can he handle a sales and marketing stint? He's reciting poetry." So that's
Turns out they lost a good resource.
that is not for me to.
I think it was ITC's gain and eventually Sambit's gain as well.
So
that's
Kolkata campus actually prepares you for, makes you a bounce back or prepares you for a shock absorber as well. Would you agree?
Yes,
campus.
Absolutely. So I think in my very limited experience that I've had so far, I have come to realize that the journey is actually not about becoming somebody. It is actually just taking out those elements one by one, what you are not. So that way, I'm very, very happy that they did not accept me for what I was, and I have no regrets whatsoever that I did not get selected.
Shobhit, we are almost at the end of our webinar. It's been fantastic talking with you, and Dear audience, it's been brilliant having your participation. But if you could end, and of course, Preeta, to have you is great always, and the chemistry that you have with the ex-students is fantastic as well. So if we can end with a story, maybe a real life story from your life, which would be a motivator and which could leave motivating and inspiring aftertaste to this fantastic webinar.
Okay, so instead
recite something, even recite something to get your own back.
Okay. So out of
afterwards,
I would go for let me recite a small piece, right? That I think is more convenient. I think I've talked enough and more about myself, and it's a little more embarrassing to continue doing it. So it's a very small piece. It's like a translation from Tagore, and it's one of my favorite pieces. I keep revisiting it from time to time, to regain my sanity. So I'll just end by reciting that piece. It's it goes like this. Let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain, but for the heart to conquer it. Let me not look for allies in life's battlefield, but to my own strength. Let me not crave in anxious fear to be saved, but hope for the patience to win my freedom. Grant that I may not be a coward, feeling your mercy in my success alone, but let me find the grasp of your hand in my failure. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Shobhit. Over to you, Preeta, to end this on a high note.
I actually know that in Bengali.
Yes, it's Rabindranath, right?
Yes, it is something that I think all of us have found inspiring, not only when we were young, but even at my very, very advanced stage now too. It's a very inspiring bit. Shobhit, we can't thank you enough for being with us today. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and sharing your experiences firsthand, especially with the anecdotes that you've thrown in, have made it so much more personal, and also it's easier for us to understand what you're talking about. Thank you so very, very much for being here with us.
Absolutely grateful. Thank you so much for having me.
And Avirupa, thank you. As usual, you're the most brilliant moderator on earth. Bless you. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.